Welcome to another episode of the VCF Musketeers, the podcast for all businesses utilizing or planning to utilize VMware Cloud Foundation. In today's episode, we have Chris McCain as a guest. Welcome, Chris. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here. So, my name's Chris McCain. I work in the application networking and security division at VMware by Broadcom. I think I'm going on my 13th year here at Broadcom. Prior to that, VMware was my biggest customer. I did a lot of training and content development for VMware. I think I was the second or third contractor they hired to teach ESX2 way back many years ago. So every time I say that, I get a laugh just because, how we used to awe at vMotion back in ESX2, and now we just take it for granted. So happy to be here.
Thank you. But the vMotion part is really, it brings me always back. It was, I think, 23, directly when the acquisition was finalized, no, 24, 20, no, 23. We were at AWS reInvent, and they were actually making a big show about the final implementation of being able to move EC2 instances from one host to another within the same availability zone for sure, and
Right.
15,000 other requirements. And I was sitting there with Sasha and saying, it's like, did they just say they have invented vMotion? And you
Yeah.
had more or less 50,000 people completely got off their chairs. It's like, finally, we can do that. And you were like, okay, you could have just bought another hypervisor and solved it that way. Like,
Right. Yeah.
different story. But yeah, it has been great times. We met several times over the teaching stories. Like for many years, I did that as well. It's
Mhm.
from time to time I wish it back, but on the other side, it's like 5 days in the training room really feels slow. Like
Doesn't
it's
it,
really
it doesn't that feel that way? You look back, you're like, man, how did I do 5 days, 8 or 9 hours each day? Like teaches. Yeah, it seems to be a lot. Of course, now we're on planes all the time. We're going to meet, right? So we're in three different cities instead of one. So pick your poison at that point. But yeah,
it's
it's come a long way.
it's a different story, but I think it's also I don't necessarily always want to try that, because it's like even when I do, we just had a team event, and it's like getting people to follow along full days in training room is already challenging. It's like 5 days. I'm not sure if I'm built up for that anymore.
I know, right?
But let's move along a bit. Is like, can you give us like your 60 seconds elevator pitch why every enterprise should use VMware Cloud Foundation for their private cloud? What would be your stance on
Yeah, look, I think the gist of it is when it comes to security, historically, security has been seen as this complex thing that takes a lot of time to get to a point where you feel comfortable with the amount of risk that you've reduced in the environment. And when you look at VMware vDefend and the portfolio of security products that we have, because of the architecture, the uniqueness of the architecture, and because of the management plane, we've really flip the switch on security architecture. And so now customers have the ability to quickly and easily buy down risk in their environment in a manner that doesn't have significant impact to the operational model. And I think that's the key. The time to value is reduced significantly. So you see the impact quickly, but also with minimal impact to the operational model.
Yeah, and I think it's when we look at, especially at the security scenario, it's like, and we covered that in some of the episodes before, is what a lot of people, when you hear currently, is on one hand, when people talk about VMware going out of service and everything is going to be replaced by Kubernetes and everything like that, where I say it's like, okay, so first and foremost, you compare apples with pineapples, or whatever you want to say, because not everything which is currently running in a legacy VM is going to become a Kubernetes workload. It's not that easy. It's like everybody thought that when containers would come up. It's like, I remember when Docker was becoming big, friends of mine calling me, it's like, you should really get off that VMware bandwagon. It's like everything is going to be a container soon. No one needs virtual machines anymore. And here we sit several years later. Even the founder left the Docker ship. And from that perspective, it's every workload has its specific scenario, and not everybody is a greenfield startup company somewhere in the
Right.
Bay Area which can start off in public cloud. Many companies have, especially also legacy applications, which sometimes are not that easy to protect from inside or even migrate into any of these applications. And all of that is where vDefend comes in pretty handy, because how do you want to protect an out of service a Windows operating system? And I think we both know is like, when you look at legacy enterprises, it's like there is a hell of a lot of Windows versions which you don't actually want to see anymore, but they are
Yeah.
still existing. And that is where things like vDefend come in handy, because
Yeah, it definitely brings up a phenomenal point where you see the breadth of capability with vDefend, with something like you said, protecting legacy operating systems. If you think about the difficulty that that might entail, you'd have to know where these are. You'd have to know each of them. Where vDefend, because it's so tightly integrated into the hypervisor and the VMware tools, we can build security groups that say if the operating system equals X, then put it in the group. So it's a dynamic security infrastructure. But at the same time, not only are we good at protecting those legacy operating systems, but look, I think all of Broadcom, VMware by Broadcom, has fallen in love with containers. They see tremendous opportunity in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of workloads that are running in containers. And I would say the same is true with application networking and security. It wouldn't make sense for us to build a security product that was sort of focused solely on virtual machines and legacy operating system, things like that. So the extensibility of vDefend to not only the legacy operating systems, but also into the container space, it just shows that if you start to think about security not as a point product, but as something that's built into the fabric of your private cloud, you start to realize the powerful capabilities that you get out of that.
And I think that's also the uniqueness when we look especially at VCF 9 now, is we finally have an integrated product with integration first. Whereas in the old days with VMware, it was basically, it's like, hey, if we glue all of this somehow together, it becomes a platform. But now it's a different story. It's integration and platform first. And then if the product works standalone, fine, but that's not
Yeah.
the focus anymore. And I think that is what, especially what many, not even the very large enterprises, but many companies have been asking for, is like, guys, get us out of this nightmare of making all of these products work together, then let alone the scenario that at one point in time we need to upgrade that from one version to another. It's like,
Yeah.
I have been there. And I mean, to be honest, as a professional services company, for us, it has been a good business of especially moving people in cloud director scenarios. And trust me, we just signed a few days ago another large contract with a large service provider, moving them from V to T. So even these things are still happening,
So
and
there it
that
is.
is several thousand tenants within there which need to be migrated. And that is another sign for that sometimes we need to think about where we are, where we have been, and that not everything changes as quickly. But what we see at the moment out there in the industry is like every customer talks is like, how can we get onto VCF 9? We don't want to actually look at anything else anymore. It's like, how can we get there? How can we get there fast? How can we adopt that? Because it is like unseen when we look at older vSphere versions and other things before. It's like everybody out there is very enthusiastic to really get there, because they see the value out of having a really truly integrated story with all these products.
Yeah, and look, I think you were being nice when you said it was glued together, because I use the analogy that old VCF prior to Broadcom, it was held together with band-aids and gauze pads and ball bearings. There was very little, if any, integration. Right now, we look at the platform, and I think there's been more integration work done since the acquisition than had been done in the previous decade, but yet we still called it VMware Cloud Foundation. But I think that is a testament then to the whole premise behind Broadcom, and that is, let's build products that are purpose built to solve a business problem for a set of customers that understand how critical and difficult it would be to solve that problem without an integrated platform. And I'm not saying that vDefend is going to solve the entire security problem, because I still think that we are fighting legacy silos of physical networks and physical firewalls and physical storage and development teams, right? But I think customers are starting to make this shift in their mindset around security, that security is not something that belongs to any one silo, that security is something that has to be embraced by each of these additional silos. It's the common thread that if the organization wants to truly build a security posture that they can feel comfortable with, it's going to be because the networking team is playing their role and the developers are developing with the security architecture in mind. Meanwhile, the virtualization engineer is being able to leverage tools like vDefend to protect all of the things running in the hypervisor. And I've seen customers now, especially on the virtualization teams, I've seen them start to feel this sense of empowerment where now they have a seat at the table when it comes to enterprise security because of how much the organizations put into the hypervisor. It's not just a matter of it's an important piece, it's oftentimes the most critical piece to security. And it really elevates the responsibilities of the virtualization team, because if 85% of the workloads are running on the hypervisor and I'm giving you a purpose-built tool to protect those workloads, you really become a critical part to that security environment. So I think there's a humanistic element that's happening, this change that's occurring in the way people are saying, hey, security is this avenue towards making me this relevant, powerful part of the organization, but also as a common thread among all of the different silos in the company.
And I think it's like in the old NSX story days, and and we all remember the slides we had back there explaining is like, hey, what's perimeter, what's inside, and why you can't actually do this. And it's not about one or the other. You need the perfect combination of all of these systems
Yeah.
and services, because it's not that your perimeter firewall is going to do everything, but at the same point in time, we are not going to rip that one out and actually say it's like, hey, let's wait until the traffic hits the hypervisor and then see what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
It's not one or the other. We need the combinations of all of these scenarios. But at the same point in time, as you said, it's like we need easier ways on how to apply security. Like we put text on a virtual machine and the text become part of the security group so that we can tell it's like, look, on this virtual machine is a web server installed. So it gets in specific tag so that the systems know about, hey, we need on one end the port open potentially internally or externally or whatever else. And we can easily manage and control that. Things which people have tried over physical firewalls and perimeter firewalls for years. And I think we all who have been long enough in this industry have seen physical firewalls. After 3 years on replacement, you go through the rules and it's like, half of them potentially should not be here anymore.
Yeah. There's no
And
cleanup.
they are never cleaned up, and you never know if an IP address is being reused anywhere. And trying
Yeah.
to build security between applications is getting more critical. And I think it's the same story with, it's like if you are being hacked, you want to be sure that people are not easily moving around from house to house or from VM to VM, which is the other part of the story, is why I think the storyline around vDefend and everything else becomes more and more important as companies see and learn is being attacked is a normal thing. Being actually the scenario that one machine actually gets hijacked is something you can, it's like whoever runs around out there and says like, oh, we are 100% bulletproof. It's like, no, you're not.
No.
Trust me, there
As
is
long as there's still
something.
humans working there, they're not bulletproof.
And that's the other part. It's like humans are also behaving their way. And what you need to keep in mind is also is like how you treat your employees is also a good part in it. It's like I was lately on a security conference where they said it's like social engineering has been one thing. Bribery nowadays has become a more interesting game. And it's like it's the storyline is which one of the security guys said. It's like it's very simple. It's like they look at job portals or Reddit or something else for people which are unhappy at the company. Then they contact them and say, it's like, look, you get half a Bitcoin or something else. And all you have to do is I'm going to send you an email. You open the attachment, you wait for half an hour, and then you tell the IT department that you thought that you just made a huge mistake by clicking on an attachment.
Yeah.
And from their perspective, that means, at least at the moment, you're pretty off the hook. The problem is human mankind doesn't work that way. The stupid guy is going to spend the 25 or 50K or whatever he just got immediately on something. And with that, it's going to be too obvious. If people could behave in such a scenario and actually leave the money alone for 5 years or something like that, most likely no one would figure out. But again, it has something to do. If you treat your employees that they are willing to do something like that, but that's the
Yeah.
same in physical building infrastructures. Like, how did people actually get around alarm systems and stuff like that? In many cases, not like in the movies where people hack into the system. It's like,
That's
it's
a
much more.
little USB cable in there, and a little thing runs through millions of combinations. Yeah, no.
And it's like, no, here is a key, here is a card. You just need to find someone who is willing to give it up for half a day or something like that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, look,
it's
we're definitely beyond the point that a customer thinks a physical firewall is enough. The next evolution is being able to educate the customer on how to easily create that east-west protection in the environment in a way that's not so overwhelming that they're just like, it's going to take too long or it's too hard, so we're not going to do this type of thing. And if you look at the portfolio of products within vDefend, from distributed firewall to gateway firewall, security intelligence, NTA, NDR, IDS, IPS, there's no question that Broadcom is a security company, right? Having all of that. It's a matter of customers being able to understand that it's not an all or nothing proposition. You pick and choose the pieces that solve the business problem you're trying to solve, and you can be as conservative or aggressive as you want to be in these technologies. Now, most customers are going to fall under the umbrella of, hey, I don't have anything today. And where do I start? How do I begin this process? And that's where we've built a go-to-market strategy called vDefend 1, 2, 3, 4, which gives them an assessment. It walks them through protecting infrastructure protocols, doing zoning, getting into application ring fencing, and then if they want to, all the way into micro segmentation. So a very prescriptive way to say, hey, I need to buy down risk. Give me a plan that allows me to do that. And for most customers, that'll be enough and they'll be done. And realistically, I think what customers need to understand is it's not just the threat actors anymore that are an issue. Because you'll find there was a high profile hotel company, casino company that was attacked, and they didn't want to pay the ransom. But shortly after, there was a class action lawsuit where they were sued and ended up having to pay. Well, it turns out that the amount they paid from the class action lawsuit was more than the amount that the attackers were asking for. So the lawyers were worse than the threat actors. So what we need to figure out, and I think this is going to happen as an industry, and Broadcom is a big part of this, but how do we figure out what is the least amount of security that has to be in place that would allow an organization to not only feel confident about their security posture, but also to ensure that in the event there was an attack and there was a class action lawsuit, that they wouldn't lose the lawsuit. Because it's almost, that's more important than figuring out how to not pay the ransom. Because there's, at least with the ransom, you get an option of whether you want to pay it. When it comes to getting sued and losing, you don't have a choice but to pay that, right? So these technologies, they're game changers with respects to being able to establish a baseline of security that mitigates against the most common things that attackers want to do. But it requires a change in thinking, because most people think security, they think, oh, I got to know this IP and I got to know this IP. And then I got to make sure that these can't talk to each other. But you got to let go of that. And you got to embrace the idea that vDefend being tied into vCenter, we're going to use constructs and tagging taxonomies and dynamic security groups and all of these things that don't fall into place with legacy security, that's going to make it exponentially easier to be able to implement in the environment. And that, that takes time for a customer to understand it enough that they feel comfortable being able to do it and embrace it.
Yeah, but I think it's still much simpler when you utilize tools like vDefend, because you have it all in one place. Whereas
Absolutely.
trying to build this with a legacy physical firewall, you manually segment all the networks, you build tons of VLANs or VXLANs, you try to interconnect them, you need to route
Yeah.
them, then it's not set up on every port. I think it's like we have all been there, bought the t-shirt
Yeah.
and failed on that one. It's like, it is much better. And let's face it, when we look at the modern enterprises, especially also when we now talk about repatriating from public cloud back into the on-premise scenario. No one is really talking about moving back into physical hosts anymore. It's like that is a
No.
very, very rare scenario. And so 80, 90, or in most cases, far above 95% of the workloads are going to be virtual or containers in one way or form. And if we move that into that stage, then we are in a much safer space if we have it in control with one scenario. Where we need potentially other security mechanisms is when it comes down, but that's a completely different ballgame and scenario by now, on how to protect end user devices and stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
a completely different story. And there are other people and other companies who need to take care of that. And it's always good to look at both sides. And I have enough customers who say it's like, there's one way on how we protect our server and data center environment. And by intent, there is a completely different way on how we approach our end user devices and corporate network security, so device security and stuff like that, because they say it's like, look, if one of these systems would fail or one attacker would actually make it into one, we still are sure that the other side works. However, I still don't believe it's like, if someone gets your server and backend infrastructure, it's nice that you have end devices, but it's not going to lead to much more.
Sure. You mentioned something that I think is really interesting. So you and I are both VCDXs. We've done a lot of work on designing infrastructure. And one of the most important things I think that comes to light when we leverage vDefend is because vDefend doesn't require changes to the physical network. Because vDefend breaks the relationship apart between IP and security, the implications on infrastructure design are huge. When we go out and tell customers, oh, the private cloud operating model, right? It's a destination, or it's not a place. It's an operational model, blah, blah, blah. But when you think about the operational model of cloud, it all hinges on networking. It hinges on being able to consume networking in a manner that is quick and easy without outside influence. And historically, that outside influence was security. You mentioned it a moment ago. We had to route things over a layer 3 device in order to secure it, in order to control it. But if we break that relationship apart, think about the impact of the network now. The network becomes a static, stable, reliable entity where really what we need is an SLA. Just pass my packets. Same way if I go to Amazon or Google or Azure, from a networking perspective, what I'm asking is pass my packets. And then everything else happens in software. And because vDefend is sitting in the hypervisor, because we break that relationship, we are opening the door for customers, for you and I, to go into customers and design and say, listen, the next evolution of your data center is to treat the physical network fabric as a static, stable, reliable entity that just passes packets. That's it. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not relegating it to this unknown blah, but it's still critically important. But the way that we design it and the way that we wire it and the way that we manage it are fundamentally different when we really get into the operational model of a private cloud. But it all hinges on being able to embrace security to get rid of IP security boundaries.
And again, it's like the story is different as we talk about VCF 9 and stuff like that. It's like what we see when we work with customers is one of the first steps when we analyze migration scenarios is like, okay, so which of the old features were you really using? It's like, I don't care about what you bought in your ELA, but what were you really using? And very often you figure out it's like, okay, there is a set of customers which had vSphere and vSAN. Some had a bit of NSX up and running. And then you go through, it's like, okay, so what are you using NSX for? In many cases, sadly enough, we saw that many of them were using some basic routing and a few other things, which is always the point where I say, it's like, look, we can either talk about a migration project, or if you have enough hardware, let's actually start on the greenfield side, build this all up with a new network design and everything else, and then we move the workloads with HCX or whatever else easily over, because there is not much more we need to migrate in the first place. And that gives you a clear start in VCF 9. At the same point in time, we don't have so much discussions about the networking team, which still might have whatever network platform behind, and they always feel threatened by, it's like, oh, you try to take something away from me, and actually don't speak about that much about taking it away. It's like, this is just an operating model of the private cloud. You have now overlay networks, period. That's it. And we are going to implement them. And the less you actually threaten people with it, it's like the easier you get them. And then once we get into it and we start, it's like, hey, so let's talk about how we protect each one of these workloads from each other. How are we going to build all of that? And actually add that as a secondary step into that. And all of a sudden people say, it's like, yeah, that makes sense that we move it over here. And by the way, we are running out of capacity on Palo Alto or 40 or whatsoever anyway. So we are rather thankful that you actually take that routing out of our way, because it's like, yeah, we could route it, but the problem is we are basically the bottleneck from a network perspective, and we don't want to be the bottleneck. But we also don't want to spend a few more millions on the next higher grade firewall system, which is only going to help survive us for a little while. Let alone the fact, if we talk about private AI and the data we have to move for private AI, then it becomes a completely different rocket ship, because at this point in time, a lot of the physical firewalls are going to be freaking expensive if you want to protect one system from another, because if you want that volume of data through it, it's going to be a complete disaster. So
yeah, look, I mean, you and I as architects, we certainly love when a customer says, hey, I'm going to build this new greenfield. Come do that. Right. It's the brownfield environments that are the super challenging things. And that's where trying to get customers to recognize the time to value with regards to all of the products in the VCF stack, because security built into the hypervisor doesn't require any network changes. You can get quick value out of vDefend. Right. And then 12 months, 18 months, when it's time for a storage refresh, oh, well, we already own vSAN. Okay, now we can capitalize on owning vSAN. And then, hey, hey, Eve, listen, we're thinking of redoing our DR plan, and we don't want to re-IP anymore. Oh, well, great. You already own NSX, so we can stretch layer 2, right? There's all of these use cases that fit over time into these customers. So as architects, we get to design a platform that allows them to consume these different features at their own pace, but without having to restructure everything. So it's really a beautiful, listen, it's a blessing and a curse, because it takes the complexity out of design, but it still requires folks like you and I as architects to be able to understand business problems and technology and bring them together to showcase, what does this value look like? What does your data center look like in 10 years when you start using all of these powerful features together?
And it's, in the end, it's also, it has something to do with not being overwhelming, because that is what we have all seen far too often, is people's like, no, we have VCF, we want to use it all. It's like, okay, let's step down a bit and actually go step by step.
Be patient.
What we have, what do you need first? How do we get to value quickly, so that we don't build something which is a rocket ship if you only need a car? And I have seen that often enough. It's like, I have seen even in the service provider space, where we had requirements meetings as architects, and I said, it's like, great, you perfectly presented to me the data sheet of the product. Now let's talk about your real requirements. It's like, we need all. It's like, okay, can we have a sales guy in here from your operations? And it's like, oh no, they have no clue what they are telling them. It's like, yeah, they are talking to your customers. So maybe we bring them in, because you just actually went through the Gartner checklist of all the features you want to have. But let's talk about what you really need on a daily basis.
What does the business need? What are we solving with this feature? Are you implementing the feature just for the sake of the feature, or are you solving a business problem here?
And it is becoming more and more of a I think of a challenge of many IT departments, that they still think that they exist because they exist, and many of them have forgotten that they exist to support the business. The same way as the electrician, the HV guy, or whatever else you have in the company is like, everybody plays a little part in building something for the company. And as much as we, from an IT perspective, hate to say that, we are also just one building block out of this scenario. And we need to look into what exactly is the business problem we are solving. And then we can build another bell and whistle on the side if we need to. But it's like, just building something for the sake of it does not make sense anymore. And most corporations are trying to get behind that. So that's a good thing. So we spoke already for quite a bit. Maybe let's do one or two closing questions. So one of them would be, for example, what would you suggest a CIO who is on the fence whether they should use VCF over one of the other, let's say the green, blue, purple, whatsoever solutions are out there? It's like, what is the killing argument for using VCF about what most of the others have to offer out there?
Yeah, this is a good question. And to be honest, I approach the way I work at Broadcom, I approach with that very question. If I were a CIO, why would I look at this, right? And from now, this is me from the inside looking out. Um, I want I want something that is going to ease the way the organization solves business problems. And I want it done in a manner that supports the way we make money the best. So I don't want humans to have to touch anything and everything that has to be deployed. So I want to rely on automation. I want to be secure and I want to be performant and I want it to be up and running. I mean, heck, I might as well just say the VCDX, right? Availability, manageability, performance, recoverability, and security, right? Those are the things I'm concerned with. But as the CIO, what I'm not just concerned with those things, I'm concerned with how I balance these things. So I know that anything more secure is never going to be easier to manage than not having to secure it. But I need to find the balance that says I can improve my security without exponentially making management harder. So I would look for platforms that are going to solve my business problems, but maintain the characteristics of what I'm trying to achieve for the people who have to manage it. That's the value in Broadcom. The value in the integration that we're doing, the value in building these features into the fabric is that it makes it easier to manage and consume and automate. And ultimately, if you're an executive, those are the characteristics of an enterprise that are going to allow the business to make money quickly.
Good. Another one is, what is the one feature you would say is the most underrated in VCF? That's a trick one.
In VCF or in can I include
VCF
V?
or ANS or
No,
in combination.
I'll give you two. I'll give you one for VCF and I'll give you one for VDefend. So in VCF, spoken from experience, I think the life cycle management changes that have been made are radically better. The ability to do updates without having to reboot for up to 80% of your, I mean, that's unbelievably late to the market, but significant power behind it. So I love the update feature. If I look at VDefend, I like to keep it simple. So I'm going to say distributed firewall. It's just so easy to implement and manage, yet so powerful. I don't know how you ever get something that's better than that. I love NDR. I love how NDR can give me a timeline of an attack, and I can take that and I can reduce the mean time to recover and things like that. But ultimately, I'm just old school. I want to keep it simple, but I want the most bang for my buck. And there's no question that it's distributed firewall.
Good. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today. I think there might be a chance for another episode and to cover a few more things.
I'm
And
sure you and I could talk for days.
I am sure. And we will certainly at one point potentially do also a larger panel with a few of us and
Yeah, that'd
actually
be great.
we will do. So thank you for joining today and hope you have a good day.
Thanks for having me.